Good day. Welcome to Science 9 again. I'm Teacher Michael. We're going to discuss Module 1, Week 1 to 2, Respiratory and Circulatory System. Our learning objective for this day is explain how the respiratory and circulatory system work together to transport nutrients, gases, and other molecules to and from the different parts of the body. Are you ready to learn now? Let's start! What do you notice on the picture? Yes, you're right. The girl is in yoga or meditating. While the girl is meditating or doing yoga, she is inhaling and exhaling. The question is, what body system is responsible for breathing exercise? Or what body system is responsible for inhaling and exhaling? Yes, you're correct. That is respiratory system. Respiratory system is liable for the method of respiration that's vital to the survival of living beings. Respiratory system has different parts. Let us now know the different parts of respiratory system. I will show to you jumbled letters. What you're going to do is to identify the meaningful word based on those jumbled letters. Those jumbled letters that I'm going to show to you are the parts of respiratory system. So let us continue. What do you think is the first word or the first part of respiratory system? That's correct. That is nose. Nose is what we normally use to inhale and exhale. It has nostrils and cilia. The nostrils are the opening of our nose or the two opening of our nose, and the cilia are the small hairs inside of our nose that traps and filters those dirts that could enter in our nose. What do you think is the next part? Yes, you're right. That is mouth. The mouth is what we use to breathe when we need more air. So when we need more air, we can now open our mouth. If the air that comes in our nose is not enough, that's the time we have to use our mouth to breathe in more air. After the air flows in our nose and mouth, where do you think the air flows now? What is our next part? Very good. That is pharynx. After nose and mouth, the air now flows to our pharynx. What is pharynx? The pharynx or our throat is behind of the nose and the mouth. Pharynx or our throat is both part of respiratory and digestive system. Meaning to say, it is a both passage of air and the food that we intake. Inside of our throat or pharynx is our tonsils, which partially obstruct the passage of food and air. After the air flows from our nose and mouth through then to our pharynx, what is the next part, or where now the air flows after pharynx? Very good. After pharynx, the air now flows to our larynx. What is larynx? The larynx is our voice box. It houses the vocal cords and the different muscles used in producing sounds. At the top of the larynx is a epiglottis, aids in closing the larynx tightly to prevent passage of food or liquids. So, at the top of this larynx is a epiglottis. This epiglottis prevents the food that could pass through our larynx, because the larynx, the only thing that could pass here is the air, because the air will vibrate our vocal cords in order for us to produce sounds. So to prevent for the food to go here inside in the larynx, there is what we call epiglottis. So this how epiglottis works at the top of our larynx. This is our epiglottis and this is the larynx. So now once the food pass from the pharynx, the epiglottis will close the larynx to prevent the passage of food in the larynx, because larynx, the only thing that would pass here is the air. So that's how the important epiglottis is at the top of the larynx. So after from pharynx going to larynx, the air now flows to our, what do you think is the next part? Very good. That is what we call trachea. What is trachea? The trachea is the windpipe. It is a tube through which respiratory gas transport takes place. It is lined with ciliated cells to push particles out and cartilage rings to guard it against pressure when breathing. So the next part is the trachea or the windpipe. After the air flows to our trachea, the air now flows to our, very good, that is what we call bronchi. The bronchi are the two tubes at the end of the trachea, which leads to our lungs. So those are the two tubes at the end of our trachea. Those are bronchi. After bronchi, there is smaller tubes inside of our lungs. What do you think are those smaller tubes? Very good. That is what we call bronchioles. What are those bronchioles? Bronchioles are several pinhole branches or hair-like tube inside of our lungs. Those are smaller branches of the bronchi. That is what we call the bronchioles. Those bronchioles are connected to a certain sac. So what do you call, or after the air flows in our bronchioles or on those smaller branches of bronchioles, where now the air flows? Very good. That is the alveoli. That is the sac that I am referring to earlier. Those are the air sacs inside of our lungs. Where gas exchange happens, it is surrounded by blood vessels called capillaries. So those are the air sacs, or what we call the alveoli. Bronchioles and alveoli are inside of our, very good, that is inside of our lungs. We have two lungs, and these are the most essential organ of our respiratory system. It consists of a cluster of bronchioles and alveoli, blood vessels, and elastic tissue. The main function is to transfer oxygen into the bloodstream and to excrete carbon dioxide into the air. So once we intake air or oxygen, that's the time we also exhale or take off carbon dioxide that comes from our lungs. Do you know that our right lung is much larger than our left lung? Why do you think so? Our left lung is much smaller than our right lung because the heart is on the left side of our chest. So the left lung gives space for our heart. So that's the reason why left lung is much smaller than our right lung, because the left lung gives space for our heart. Now those are the part of respiratory system. Now let us take a look again on how the air flows in our respiratory system. Once we take in air, what's the first part where the air flows? That is nose and mouth, or our nasal cavity. That's the first part where the air enters once we inhale. After that, after the air flows inside of those nose and mouth, what comes next? The air now flows to our pharynx. Very good. After pharynx, the air now flows to our, very good, larynx. After larynx, the air now flows to our nice, that is trachea or the windpipe. Once after the air flows to our trachea, it will now flow to, very good, the two branching tubes at the end of trachea. Those are what we call bronchi. And after blowing the air on that bronchi, the air now flows to those smaller branches of inside of our lungs. Those are what we call bronchioles. Then it will now go to, the air now will go to, very good, the air sacs inside of our lungs. And those are what we call alveoli. Those bronchioles and alveoli are located inside of our two lungs. So that's how the air flows inside of our respiratory system. Aside from those parts of respiratory system, there is another part or organ that helps us to breathe or to inhale and exhale. That is what we call the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a shape-like parachute and located below your lungs. So this is our diaphragm. It divides the chest cavity from the abdomen. We also have the intercostal muscles, which are located between your ribs. When we inhale, our diaphragm contracts and moves downward. When we inhale also, our chest expands. Our ribs move forward or upward and outward. And also, the lungs expands. So those are the changes happen when we inhale. How about when we exhale or take off carbon dioxide? Our diaphragm relaxes and moves upward when we exhale. Our chest returns to its size, the ribs returns to its position, and the lungs return to its size. Those are the changes happens when we inhale and exhale. After we inhale oxygen and we exhale carbon dioxide, what will happen now to the oxygen that we inhale? Does it remain inside of our lungs? Yes, you're right. The oxygen will be distributed to the different parts of the body. Why? Why is that oxygen should be distributed to the different parts of our body? Because those organs that we have, the different organs that we have, needs oxygen for them to function well. So, oxygen must be distributed to the different parts of our body. The following question is how? How does the oxygen will be distributed to the different parts of our body? Yes, there is another system that could help the respiratory system to distribute the oxygen. And that is another system that we're going to discuss. Are you familiar with this one? This one? And this one? This is the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood. And these parts or organs that we have are the main parts of what we call circulatory system. What is circulatory system? Circulatory system. The main function of circulatory system is to transport oxygen and nutrients to the body cells and to carry the oxygenated blood or oxygen-poor blood and carbon dioxide back to the heart and the lungs. So its main part or function through the help of respiratory system is to transport oxygen. There are different parts or main parts of the circulatory system. These are the heart, the blood, and the blood vessels. For us to be able to understand better the function of circulatory system, let us now learn the different function of its main parts. Let's start with the blood or the fluid transport. Blood is a tissue made of fluid cells and fragments of cells. It composes of different components. We have the plasma, the red blood cell, white blood cell, and the platelets. The plasma is the fluid material of our blood. It makes up about 55% of the total volume of the blood. Red blood cells are those cells which is the reason why your blood is red. It also has a important function in which it carries the oxygen. Red blood cells contains hemoglobin, an iron protein material that could carry the oxygen. So, red blood cells is very important in carrying oxygen through the help of its hemoglobin. Another important cell that the blood has is the white blood cells. White blood cells is very important in fighting the diseases. White blood cells creates antibodies that could kill germs and bacteria and viruses that could enter in our body. And the last main part or component of our blood is what we call platelets. Platelets has important role also in our body because it has a function in blood clotting. So once you had a wound or cuts, eventually the blood clots. It's because of the function or the role of platelets. "55% of our blood composes of plasma, 4% of our blood composes of white blood cells and platelets, and 41% of our blood are red blood cells." Now, where does the blood flow? It flows into the next main part of our circulatory system. That is what we call the blood vessels or the pathways of circulation where the blood flows. The blood vessels has three types. We have the arteries, veins, and capillaries. What are those three types? The arteries carry blood away from the heart towards the rest of the body. So meaning to say, these arteries carries the blood that flows away from the heart. Those blood carries oxygen-rich blood, or those blood has rich in oxygen. Arteries carries blood which is oxygenated or oxygen-rich blood. Aside from arteries, the arteries also have a smaller version, and those are the arterioles. Again, arteries carries blood away from the heart and it carries oxygenated blood or oxygen-poor blood. Another type of blood vessel is veins. Veins carry blood from the rest of the body back towards to the heart. So these blood vessels, the type of blood that flows here are those blood that comes to the different parts of our body going to our heart. So the blood it carries are those blood which in poor in oxygen, or it carries deoxygenated blood or oxygen poor blood. Veins also has a smaller version, which are what we call the venules. Then the smallest type of blood vessels that we have is what we call the capillaries, are the smallest blood vessels that move blood to and from the cells of the body. Its walls are very thin that materials can easily diffuse into and out of them. Then let's move to one of the most essential part of the circulatory system, and that is our heart. That is the vital pump. The main function of the heart is to keep the blood moving constantly through the blood. So its main function is to pump the blood and to make the blood circulation, make it properly in proper motion or continuous in movement. Because once the heart stops to pump, therefore the blood will stop in circulating. Our heart has four chambers. We have the right atrium, the left atrium, the right ventricle, and the left ventricles. This is the right atrium, right ventricle, and the left ventricle. The ventricles are separated by a thick wall of tissue called the septum. So these are the septum that separates the ventricles. And also our heart has valves, which are flaps of tissues that prevent blood from flowing backwards. So those are the four valves inside of the heart. That prevents the blood from flowing backwards, because once the blood flow backwards, there's a tendency the blood will not circulate properly, and the heart will stop to pump. There are different types of circulation or blood circulation. If the blood circulates between the heart and the lungs, that is what we call the pulmonary circulation. If the blood circulates between the heart and the rest of the body, except for the lungs, that is what we call systemic circulation. And if the blood circulates inside of our heart only, that is what we call the coronary circulation. Now, how does the blood flow? After we take in oxygen, how the blood will be distributed to the different parts of the body through the help of the circulatory system. So for this time, we're going to discuss how the blood flows. From our different parts of our body, once the blood becomes deoxygenated, meaning to say the oxygen is already distributed to the different parts of our body, to our cells, to the different organs, the blood will now become deoxygenated, or oxygen poor blood, or poor in oxygen. So the tendency is the blood should back to the heart, for the heart to pump it to the lungs to make the blood become oxygenated again. So before it goes to the lungs, what are those spots that the blood will pass through? From the lower and upper part of our body, those deoxygenated blood will go back to our heart through the means of the superior and inferior vena cava. Those blood, or those deoxygenated blood that comes from the lower part of the body, will enter to our heart through the inferior vena cava. On the other hand, those deoxygenated blood that comes from the upper part of our body enters in our heart through the superior vena cava. Then those deoxygenated blood will now move will now move inside of our heart. After superior and inferior vena cava, the deoxygenated blood will move to the right atrium. That's the first chamber, or the one of the chamber of our heart. Then after right atrium, it will now move to a certain valve will open. So the right atrioventricular valves open. When the blood flows from here, it will now go here. Then this right atrioventricular valves will open once the blood flows here. After this right and atrioventricular valve open, the blood will now lead to another chamber of the heart, which is the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, another valve will open. That is what we call the pulmonary valve. So from here, the blood will now lead to a certain artery, which is what we call the pulmonary artery. This artery will now lead our blood to our lungs. That's the time the blood will now become oxygenated, because it's now inside of our lungs, wherein it exchanges oxygen, or it takes in oxygen. From the lungs, the blood become oxygenated, but it doesn't mean that those blood will now go to the different parts of the body. The tendency is that those oxygen-rich blood will still go back to our heart for the heart to pump it to the different parts of our body. So from the lungs, those oxygen-rich blood will now go back to our heart through the means of veins, which are called pulmonary veins. So the oxygen-rich blood, or oxygenated blood, will now go back to our heart through the veins, what we call pulmonary veins. From pulmonary veins, it will now lead those oxygenated blood will now flow to another chamber of our heart, which is the left atrium, or the left atria, or atrium. So from here, those oxygenated blood will now open this valve, which is what we call the left atrioventricular valve. Once it opens, the blood, which is oxygenated blood, will now move to another chamber of our heart, which is what we call the left ventricle. From left ventricle, those oxygenated blood will open another valve, which is what we call the aortic valve. And this blood will now lead to the largest artery that we have, which is what we call the aorta. And from here, the oxygenated blood or the oxygenated rich or the oxygen-rich blood will now move to the different parts of the body from the aorta. So once the blood will from this aorta distributed to the different parts of our body, and the blood delivered those oxygen to the different organs and cells that we have, the blood becomes again deoxygenated or becomes in oxygen poor again, or poor in oxygen again. So that's the reason why it will go back to the heart, then go to the lungs, and to the different parts of the body to deliver again. So these cycles happens every 60 seconds in our body. So that's how the blood flows. Respiratory and circulatory system work together closely to maintain homeostasis in the face of constant change. Every time you exercise, lie down to rest, or simply stand up, you change your needs for oxygen and nutrients. As a result, your heart speeds up and slows down, and you breathe faster or slower depending on your activity. That's all for today. Thank you for watching and listening. I hope you learned something today.